My new neighborhood is filled with cannibals. Welcome to Willow Creek. I thought moving to Willow Creek was going to be a fresh start. It was one of those picture-perfect suburban neighborhoods you'd see on real estate brochures. White picket fences, tree-lined streets, and houses that looked like they'd been plucked from a postcard. The kind of place where kids played hopscotch on the sidewalks and golden retrievers wagged their tails on manicured lawns. But beneath that surface, something was wrong. I didn't notice it at first. When I arrived, the neighbors came out to greet me, each of them wearing smiles so wide they seemed painted on. They brought welcome gifts, pies, casseroles, bottles of wine, enough to fill my entire fridge. There was Mr. and Mrs. Delaney from 2 houses down, an older couple who insisted I call them Frank and Margaret. Across the street was a single mom named Heather, who brought her teenage son Sam along to help unload my boxes. And then there was Ted, my next-door neighbor, who greeted me with a firm handshake and a grin that showed a little too much gum. They all seemed so friendly, so welcoming, but there was something about their eyes. I didn't notice it right away, but later that night, as I unpacked in the quiet of my new home, the image of their eyes kept flashing in my mind. There was a glint there, a sharpness that didn't match their polite smiles. I shook it off. I was just tired from the move, I told myself, paranoid. If only I'd trusted my instincts. The first real warning sign came 3 days later. I was mowing the lawn when I noticed Ted standing at the edge of my property, watching me. Not in a casual, neighborly way. He wasn't waving or making small talk. He just stood there, arms crossed, staring with that same wide grin plastered on his face. I cut the engine and wiped the sweat off my forehead. "Need something, Ted?" He tilted his head slightly, like a curious dog. "Just admiring your work," he said, his voice warm but off somehow, like he was reciting a line he didn't fully understand. "We like to keep things tidy around here." "Right, thanks," I muttered, restarting the mower. He stayed there, watching, until I finished the lawn. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I peeked out the window and saw him again. Standing in his driveway this time, facing my house, his silhouette barely visible in the dim glow of the streetlight. I told myself he was just weird. Every neighborhood has one, right? The overly friendly neighbor who doesn't know how to respect boundaries. But the unease wouldn't go away. The next week, I noticed something strange about the house on the corner. When I'd first moved in, it belonged to a young couple, Lisa and Brad. They'd come by on my second day with a bottle of red wine and a loaf of freshly baked bread. Lisa had seemed shy, barely saying a word, while Brad did most of the talking. But now, their house was dark. The curtains were drawn, the lawn unkempt, and their car was nowhere to be seen. I asked Heather about it while walking to the mailbox. "Lisa and Brad," she said, her smile tightening ever so slightly. "Oh, they had to leave unexpectedly. Family emergency, I think." I frowned. "That's weird. They didn't say anything to me." Heather chuckled, her laugh light and hollow. "Well, I guess you weren't here long enough to really know them. Don't worry. Things like that happen sometimes." Her answer didn't sit right with me. A few nights later, Ted invited me to a neighborhood barbecue. I didn't want to go. After everything I'd noticed, the stares, the whispers, the strange disappearances, I wanted nothing more than to lock my doors and pretend none of it was happening. But Ted was insistent, and I figured turning him down would only make me stand out more. The barbecue was held in the Delaney's backyard. Twinkling string lights hung from the trees, and the smell of grilled meat filled the air. The whole neighborhood was there, smiling and laughing as if everything was perfectly normal. Too normal. Frank Delaney handed me a plate of ribs, his grin as wide as ever. "You're going to love this," he said. "It's a family recipe, passed down for generations." I took a bite out of politeness, and the meat was delicious. Tender, smoky, perfectly seasoned. But something about the taste made my stomach churn. Heather nudged me with her elbow. "Told you Frank's the best cook in the neighborhood." I forced a smile, trying to ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. That night, I couldn't sleep. The barbecue had left me with more questions than answers. Why did the neighbors act so strange? Why had Lisa and Brad vanished without a word? And what was it about that meat that tasted so wrong? The answers came sooner than I expected. I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my window. Peering through the blinds, I saw figures moving in Ted's backyard, carrying something heavy wrapped in a tarp. They worked in silence, their movements quick and practiced. I didn't think. I grabbed my jacket and slipped out the back door, keeping to the shadows as I followed them. They led me to the Delaney's house, slipping through the side door into the basement. I waited until they were inside before creeping closer. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was thick with the metallic stench of blood. I crept down the stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight, and then I saw it. The basement was a butcher shop. Hooks hung from the ceiling, dripping with blood. Tables were lined with knives, bone saws, and piles of raw meat. And in the center of the room, a body lay on the table, its limbs neatly severed. Lisa. Her face was still intact, her eyes wide with frozen terror. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. But before I could escape, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. "Caught you," Ted whispered, his grin wider than ever. I don't know how long I was down there. Hours, maybe days. The air in the Delaney's basement was heavy with the stink of blood and decay, the kind of smell that burrowed into your lungs and stayed there. They tied me to a chair, ropes digging into my wrists, the edges of my consciousness fraying as I watched them debate my fate. Ted stood at the head of the table, his grin gone now, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. Heather paced nearby, her shoes clicking against the blood-slicked floor, while Frank and Margaret whispered to each other in the corner. "He's new," Heather said, throwing a glance in my direction. "We could bring him in, show him how we do things." "No," Ted growled, his voice low and final. "He's seen too much. He doesn't belong." "But he could," Frank chimed in, his voice warm and cheerful, as though he were talking about inviting me to a Sunday brunch. "We were all outsiders once. We just needed a little convincing." I struggled against the ropes, panic clawing at my chest. "You're all insane," I shouted. This is sick. You're monsters." Ted turned, his eyes narrowing as he stepped toward me. "We're survivors," he said, his voice low and steady. "And soon, you'll understand. Everyone does eventually." Then he crouched in front of me, his face inches from mine. His smile returned, slow and menacing, as he raised a knife from the table. I braced myself, expecting pain, but instead, he cut the ropes holding me down. "Go," he said, his grin widening. "Run, see how far you get." They let me go. I don't know why, and at the time I didn't care. The second the ropes fell away, I bolted, tripping over my own feet as I scrambled up the stairs and out into the night. The neighborhood was deathly quiet. Every house looked just as it had the day I arrived, perfect lawns, glowing porch lights, and curtains drawn tight against the world. But I knew now what was hiding behind those closed doors. I stumbled back to my house, slamming the door shut behind me and locking every bolt. My hands were trembling as I grabbed my phone to call the police, but my fingers froze over the keypad. Would they even believe me? I had no proof, no photos, no recordings, nothing but the image of Lisa's mangled body burned into my mind. And then, something even worse occurred to me. What if the police were with them? I shoved the thought aside and dialed anyway, but the line was dead. No dial tone, no static, just silence. My stomach twisted as I stared at the phone, dread creeping up my spine. Had they cut the lines? Or was this something worse? Something bigger? I didn't leave the house after that incident. Didn't answer the door when Ted or Heather came knocking with their fake smiles and cheery voices. "We missed you at the barbecue," Heather called 2 days later at night, her tone sweet and sing-song. "We saved you a plate. You'll regret missing out." I didn't respond. I didn't even move. But the hunger did. At first, I chalked it up to stress. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think. Every meal I tried to choke down turned to ash in my mouth, and every glass of water tasted like bile. The only thing that kept me going was the memory of what I'd seen, the knowledge that I had to get out of this place. But then, late at night, I woke up with a craving. It hit me like a wave, sudden and overwhelming, so intense that it felt like my stomach was eating itself. I stumbled into the kitchen, ripping open cabinets and tearing through the fridge, in the hope of finding anything bread, cereal, or fruits, so I could put something into my mouth. But nothing helped. The hunger only grew stronger, more desperate. And that's when I realized it wasn't normal hunger. It was something else, something worse. The meat from the barbecue. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. I doubled over, clutching the counter for support, my breathing ragged. That was the last thing I'd eaten, the last thing that had tasted right. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. But deep down, I already knew. The next morning, I packed what little I could carry and got into my car. I didn't have a plan, didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get out of Willow Creek before it was too late. But as I turned the key in the ignition, the car wouldn't start. I tried again and again, nothing. I stepped out, ready to check the engine, but before I could even open the hood, I felt it, the weight of eyes watching me. They were all there, Ted, Heather, Frank and Margaret, half the neighborhood, standing in a loose circle around my car, their faces calm and expectant. Ted stepped forward, his smile as wide as ever. "Going somewhere?" I backed away, my heart pounding. "Stay away from me." But they didn't move. "You've felt it, haven't you?" Ted said, his voice soft, almost kind. The hunger, it's starting to take hold. No, I said, shaking my head. I'm nothing like you. Heather laughed, a light, musical sound that made my skin crawl. Oh, but you are. It's already in you. You can feel it, can't you? The craving, the need. I turned and ran. I didn't make it far. They caught me just outside my front door, their hands like iron as they dragged me back toward the Delaney's house. I kicked and screamed, but it didn't matter. You'll thank us, Ted said as they hauled me into the basement. Once you've tasted it, really tasted it, you'll understand. You'll see. I don't remember much after that, just flashes, the glint of a knife, the sharp tang of blood, the sound of flesh being torn, and the hunger, always the hunger. At first, I tried to resist. I told myself I wasn't like them, but hunger does things to you. It gnaws at you, twists you, makes you forget who you are. The first time they made me eat, I spat it out. Ted just smiled and said, "It'll get easier." And he was right. It started small, just a bite, then another. Before long, nothing else tasted right. Bread turned to ash, water felt like poison, and when the hunger became unbearable, I gave in. That's when they welcomed me. Now I'm one of them. Last night, a young couple moved into the neighborhood. They had a baby. Their laughter echoed down the street as they unpacked boxes, happy and clueless. This morning, Heather stopped by. "We'll bring them over for dinner tomorrow," she said with a grin. "It's your turn." Ted came by later. He handed me the knife. "You'll make the first cut," he said. "It's a tradition." The hunger inside me twisted, sharp and painful. But this time, it wasn't something I wanted to stop. The next night, the couple sat at the picnic table in the Delaney's backyard. They smiled nervously, not quite understanding what was happening. The baby started to cry. Ted handed me the knife. I looked at them, their wide, scared eyes, and then I smiled. This is home now, and I'm one of them. Well, that was pretty much it. I hope you liked the story till then. Bye-bye.